My son-in-law called me a financial burden at my daughter's birthday. He didn't know his biggest client had known me for 22 years. I sat 4 chairs away and listened to a man tell a room full of people that I'd been dead weight in my own family for 20 years. What he did not know was that the man across the table from him had gotten his company its very first contract, on my recommendation, 9 years earlier. My name is Walt Barringer. I am 63 years old, and I spent 31 years running ground operations at Tucson International Airport before I retired 2 years ago. Somewhere in there, I got very good at 2 things: directing airplanes on a tarmac in a windstorm and staying quiet in a room until it was time to move. My wife, Sandy, and I have been married 38 years. She taught 4th grade at Sabino Vista Elementary for 29 of those years and retired the same spring I did, which she still says was a coincidence, and I still say was a plan neither of us admitted to out loud. We raised our daughter Renee in a house on Calle Alegria, with a pool nobody used enough and a dog nobody walked enough. Sandy runs that house the way she ran her classroom, which is to say nothing gets past her twice. My best friend, Gil Torrance, has lived 2 streets over since 1983. He drove a beer truck for 34 years and retired with a bad knee and an opinion about everything. We're the kind of friends who show up at each other's houses without calling first, and neither of us has ever once minded. Gil still keeps a folding chair in my garage that nobody else is allowed to sit in. Sandy and I married when I was 25. 63 minus 38 is 25, so the math holds if anyone wants to check it. Renee is 33 now, born 9 years into the marriage, which tracks fine. Renee married Trent Kowalski 6 years ago. Trent runs a commercial logistics brokerage out of Scottsdale, moving freight contracts for mid-sized manufacturers. He's 34. Back when he was starting out, still working out a spare bedroom, I gave him 1 piece of help and 1 piece only. I mentioned a man named Ray Ostrowski, who ran freight logistics for a regional carrier I'd worked alongside for years at the airport. I made an introduction over the phone and never thought about it again. Trent built an entire client relationship on that 1 phone call, and, as far as I knew, never mentioned where it came from. For 6 years, Trent told a version of himself that did not match what I could see. He drove a leased Range Rover I was fairly sure he couldn't afford on paper, wore a watch that appeared the same month Sandy quietly wired Renee $4,800 because they were behind on their mortgage, and talked at every family dinner like the business was thriving. I never said anything. Renee is my daughter. I was not going to make her choose sides over her husband's ego, and I did not actually know the full shape of what was happening. I only knew pieces. The warning signs stayed small. On purpose, or at least I let them. Trent stopped making eye contact with me at Sunday dinners. He corrected small details about my old job, like he needed me smaller than I was. Once at Thanksgiving, he told my brother-in-law that logistics people don't really get finance, not knowing I negotiated fuel contracts worth more than his whole company. Sandy told me I was being generous by staying quiet. I told her I was being a father-in-law. Neither of us went looking for more, because neither of us had a reason to yet. Renee's 33rd birthday dinner was at Elements at Sanctuary, up on Camelback Mountain. First Saturday in October, 14 people. Trent had invited Ray Ostrowski, hoping to lock down a contract renewal over dinner. I hadn't seen Ray in 11 years, not since our old carrier days at the airport. He didn't know Trent was my son-in-law until he sat down and saw the seating card. For 1 second, across the table, I watched him do the same math I was doing. Halfway through the second course, Trent stood to toast Renee and somehow turned it into a toast about himself. He said, and I'm quoting this exactly because I will never forget it, that he had spent 6 years quietly carrying this whole family, including, he said, my father-in-law, who I love, but let's be honest, has always been kind of financial burden on all of us. People laughed a little, the nervous kind. Renee's face went white. I sat 4 chairs down and did not say one word. I looked across the table, and Ray Ostrowski was looking directly at me. Not confused, just watching, the way a man watches when a sentence doesn't match something he already suspects. I did not confront Trent that night. Sandy asked me in the car why I was so quiet, and I told her the truth, that I needed to think before I did anything. What I actually needed, though I didn't say it yet, was to find out how bad it really was. Because I realized, sitting in that car, that I did not actually know. Gil came over the next morning with coffee and sat at my kitchen table the way he has for 40 years. Gil, you gonna let that stand? Walt, I'm gonna find out what's true first. Then I'll decide what to let stand. Gil, that's not the same as doing nothing, Walt. Walt, I know exactly what Sandy's wired him over the years. I don't know what else is going on. I want to know before I do anything. Gil nodded slowly. Gil, of course you do. You never moved a plane without checking the weather first either. Over the next 10 days, I did something I had never done in 6 years of biting my tongue. I asked Sandy to pull every wire transfer from our joint account going back 4 years, and I sat with her at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon while she made calls to our bank to confirm dates. $4,800 in March, $3,200 the previous November for truck repair, $6,000 2 years before that, which Trent had called about a loan and never once mentioned repaying. That much I expected. What I did not expect was finding, buried in an old email Sandy had forwarded me and forgotten about, a message from Trent to Renee, 2 years old, thanking her for not telling her father he'd also borrowed against his business line of credit using Renee's name as a co-signer, without me ever knowing it existed. That was new. That was the piece I hadn't had. I called Ray Ostrowski directly. No ambush, just a simple message asking if he had time for coffee, that I had information about Trent's business that affected him as a client. We met at a shop on 5th Avenue in Scottsdale on a Tuesday morning. I brought the wire transfers, dated and organized, and I told him plainly that I was the one who'd made the original introduction between him and Trent 9 years earlier, so he'd know exactly where I stood in this. I didn't editorialize beyond that. I laid out what Sandy and I had paid over 4 years and let Ray draw his own conclusions about a man who told his biggest client he was thriving while his in-laws quietly covered his mortgage. I also called a lawyer, Denise Faulkner, who Gil's brother had used for a business dispute. Denise was sharp and did not waste a sentence. Denise, you're not suing anybody. You're making sure that if this blows up, nobody can say you lied or went digging where you had no business going. Get everything dated. Stop discussing it with anyone but me. 6 weeks after that meeting, Ray's company did not renew its freight contract with Trent's brokerage. That contract was 41% of Trent's annual revenue. Trent showed up at our house on a Wednesday evening in November, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, standing on the porch mat like he wasn't sure if he was still welcome to come in without knocking. Sandy let him in and quietly took herself into the kitchen, close enough to hear, far enough to stay out of it. The TV was still on low in the living room, some rerun neither of us had been watching. Trent stood in the middle of the kitchen, radiating the kind of confidence men have right before they run out of it. Trent, Ray dropped us. 41% of my business gone, and I know you had something to do with it. Walt, I showed him bank statements. I didn't tell him a single thing that wasn't true. Trent, you went behind my back. Walt, you went in front of the dinner table and called me a burden in front of the one client who exists because I picked up a phone for you 9 years ago. Trent, I was joking. Everyone knew I was joking. Walt, Ray didn't laugh, Trent. I watched him not laugh. He tried the line about Ray already being unhappy before the dinner. He tried the line about the mortgage help being temporary. Then he said Renee must have told me about the credit line, which was its own confession because Renee had never told me a thing. I found the email myself. Walt, $4,800 in March, $3,200 in November before that, $6,000 the year before that. And a business line of credit you put your wife's name on without telling either of us it existed. I've got the dates, Trent. Do you? He didn't answer. He stood there, and for the first time in 6 years, his face stopped performing. Legally, nothing criminal occurred, and I want to be clear about that because I never claimed otherwise to anyone. Trent's crime, if you can call it that, was lying to a client and to his family, not fraud. But losing 41% of annual revenue meant he had to lay off 2 employees and refinance the business at 11% interest just to stay open. Renee found out about the credit line the same week I did, straight from Trent, and it broke something between them for a while. They went to counseling instead of a lawyer, And 6 months later, Trent apologized to me directly. Sober and specific, no excuses attached. Sandy never wired him another dollar, and neither did I. Renee's name came off the credit line within 4 months, once Trent refinanced. Ray Ostrowski and I still get lunch every few months, and neither of us has mentioned Trent's name in over a year. Sandy stood in the kitchen that same November night after Trent left and looked at me for a long moment. Sandy, you didn't even raise your voice. Walt didn't need to. The numbers did the yelling. She swatted me with a dish towel. Sandy, you're insufferable when you're right. Gil showed up an hour later. No call, same as always, and sat at the table like he had 1,000 times before. Gil, well, Walt, he knows now. That's all I ever wanted. Gil grabbed a beer from the fridge without asking. Gil, you want to know what I think? Walt, not really. And we both laughed anyway, and the kitchen felt like ours again.